G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it.
Welcome, everybody. Today I'm interviewing Doug Bouey, who is writer, commentator and a coach. And he's based in Calgary, Canada, well, at least part of his time. He tends to move around to Mexico and British Columbia, so which is a great way to be. And today we're going to be discussing the importance of fixing fractured relationships. So thanks for your time, Doug.
I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Absolutely, so am I. Now, how we know each other, we've only just met, obviously, online, but I listened to a podcast you did with Dominic Monkhouse on a similar topic, which I was fascinated with and reached out to you and appreciate responding, and here we are today. So let's have a chat about this topic, because I think it can apply to anybody, but particularly in small business. I think it's typically sometimes a challenge managing relationships. So notwithstanding if they're fractured, that's really challenging. So I guess to kick off, tell our audience a bit about yourself and your experience on this topic.
Well, I've been a chair for Vistage or Tech, as it's known, which is an organization for presidents of mid-market size companies. And I did that for 32 years. While I was engaged in running my groups that met monthly for peer advisory work, I met John Constantouros, who is the author, the developer of this process. And I said, I want to learn this, John. And he said, well, I haven't taught anyone else, but you want to, I'll teach you. And so we went into a mentorship, and I ended up being an exponent of the process that John had developed. And that led to the book called Fixing Fractures. I wrote the book primarily because John didn't. And he passed on, and I wanted to make sure that this approach was available to people, whoever needed it.
So when you say the process of John's, maybe just elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, John developed an 8-step way, an index for difficult conversations that's very easy to understand and follow. And so that's what the book documents, along with supporting materials that help people get through the process. But the idea is that these conversations, they're avoided. You know, Michael, that's one of the issues with business. It's just rampant, is the cost of avoided conflict, the cost of avoided difficult conversations where there's been ruptures between people and it hasn't been put right. And that just decays morale. It's very difficult for business to operate without the kind of collaboration that particularly the small businesses that you and I work with require. You can't just kind of wall yourself off and pretend you don't know the other person in a small environment. But that's what people try to do. You know, these conversations are avoided like the plague. And the idea of this book is to give people an option to say, you don't have to avoid it. You can get into it. You can acquire the skill and confidence to go into these conversations and know that it's going to turn out well. And it does turn out well almost all of the time. It's gone wrong for some reason, and usually the conversation, the orchestrated, disciplined conversation, can get at what's gone wrong.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you what you see as typically the challenge and why people don't sort of, I guess, deal with it head on. What would you sort of suggest are the typical reasons?
Well, I think somebody's done something, you know, in the context of the business, committed the business to a certain path, and the other partner perhaps was never really fully consulted, didn't go along with it. So they're at odds there. Or they've, one case, a president hired a COO, and the other partner, who was the sort of relationship builder in the business, didn't like this person, never felt this person was the right kind of person to be in the company. And they ended up getting to a place where they wouldn't talk to each other. Here they are running a major business, two of them, two partners, and they won't talk to each other. Well, there's not much future in that.
No, it's not going to work, is it?
Not awfully well. It's surprising how it worked as long as it did.
Yeah, right.
You managed to kind of tough it out for quite a while.
Yeah, which I guess what people do, right? And I guess it gets to a certain point and people either leave or businesses break up or whatever the outcome is.
Yeah.
And so I gather from, the relationship and where there's fractured relationship, obviously that's fundamentally a breach of trust.
Exactly.
And like you say, that's certainly sort of fundamental to functional teams. And I guess, have you aware of Pat Leccioni?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
Lencioni, and of course, Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team starts with trust.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
right. At the base of it.
Yeah. So
but you're right. The situations that this is meant to address, fundamentally at the bottom of it is breach of trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's, I'm just thinking of my personal experience over my journey, and I guess I've sort of experienced sort of some challenging times as far as relationships. And I guess the challenge is it's hard to forget or let go about experience with someone.
Well, it eats away at people.
Yes.
It must eat away at you, does it?
Well, I'm just thinking back to the times, and it did at the time. Yeah, I guess got over it one way or another. But I'm interested to just talk through that as far as what are some ways of helping people in these situations sort of work through it and come out the other end.
Well, there's no alternative but a forthright approach to the situation, and it's that people are avoiding. They want not to have to come to terms with it, and so they end up using a bunch of alternative strategies that generally don't work, but they may end up, as you say, in kind of the business coming apart or an attempt to restructure or something like that, and it just doesn't address the core problem. So the idea of this book is to say, if you can muster the will to address this, we've got the means, and you can learn how to do this so that you can get through a conversation that you've been avoiding and get to the other side of it. And usually if you do that, there is much richness on the other side that you are discounting if you are avoiding the topic.
Yeah, no, that's good. As I say, you need the will, and then I guess what you're saying, you can show them the way as part of, I guess, the book you've written about fixing fractures, and I guess the process you referred to earlier. So maybe just unpack that for our listeners as far as those key parts of the process to give a bit of an insight for those listening.
Well, one of the things that really is at the strength of the recipe, if you like, the protocol, we call it, is that there are 8 steps involved, and the purpose of it being broken into 8 steps is to say, don't mix up one factor with another, because that's very often the kind of mess that people create when they try to have a talk about things, as they start throwing in all sorts of situations, trying to pile on a bunch of related sins onto the person that they're trying to overwhelm. And of course, it just doesn't work. The other person backs up defensively and goes into their shell, or lashes out, and we end up in a much worse kind of environment. But the reason that a discipline process works is it keeps things in compartments so that the other person, instead of being overwhelmed or argued with or something like that, is able to keep track of what's going on. And that's the idea of this process, is to say, we want to get through the whole difficult conversation with both parties on track with the other, not alienated, not broken off. They've already done that. They've been broken off. So we need to put them together tentatively and keep that tentative bond growing so that they can stay with it throughout the entire conversation right to the end.
Yeah, which makes sense. So I guess in the context of a small business owner that's got a somewhat fractured relationship, say with an employee, what's the sort of starting point in that context that you talked about?
Well, the starting point is to learn the process, because you can't, just like anything else, if you want to do an accounts receivable reconciliation, there's a way to do that. There's a way to do this, and it's a good way, and it's a way that's not complicated or difficult, but it is a defined track that you get onto. And so I suggest people read the book, get familiar with the notion, get the confidence going that, no, I think I could do this. And then I ask people to download the prep sheet and do preparation for this discussion. Don't just wade into it and wing it. Go to DougBouey.com and download the prep sheet, which you can fill out online, or you can fill out in writing. And that will help you parse this thing down into its constituent elements and get you ready. So the conversation is actually an orchestrated conversation. We call it the flow. That it's not just kind of everybody sitting down and trying to talk over each other, but an orchestrated, shared conversation that people go through in a disciplined way. And that results in progress and people getting to the other side.
Want to become the best manager you can be? Check out our Kick-Ass Manager course at growasmallbusiness.com. Do the course and add your fellow managers for no extra cost. Join the 30%. 70% of people quit their job because of their manager.
So that's great. So I think, definitely encourage our listeners to go to your website and download that, and even more so, get a copy of your book, Fixing Fractures, which will leave details in the show notes. So, like you say, that's a great starting point. Downloading that's sort of gives them insight of the process. I guess if you're going to summarise that process, what are the key parts of that process, if you like, that are going to be critical?
Well, often people have, as a precedent, they have sort of lawyers arguing cases as kind of or people trying to talk other people into situations or corner them. Rather than that, we advocate people going through a very strict factual rundown and being very careful to make sure that only the things they saw, heard, or can point at are discussed in that. So it's not a question of trying to spin the thing or get it to come your way. It's a matter of getting it very dry. First this happened, then this happened, then I got this note, then that meeting occurred, and keeping it very matter of fact and sequential. And what you find often is, even at that early stage in the conversation, there's some critical fact that wasn't known to both parties. And if they had known it, it would have changed everything. So even in that recitation, it can get the problem fleshed out. That's not the end of it, but that can certainly lead to people getting, oh, okay, that's different. Now I know that I can react differently. So that would be one example. The next part would be to deal with your emotional reaction as the person bringing this conversation. And sometimes that surprises other people too, and say, and this is personal, not emotions about, I thought that you would, no, that's not an emotion, or I felt that, no, that's just a spin. If you felt mad, sad, glad, or scared, that's information for the other person to say, oh, really? Okay. And to think that other people know these things is wrong. They don't. So that was
Yeah,
just a couple of examples of headings.
yeah, no, that's very insightful. And I think, as you say, I mean, I think, and I've been guilty of this, you can assume what someone's thinking or perceives, and it's hence, I think, sounds like a good idea, just actually setting the scene with the facts as you see it and getting their context, and it gives everybody on the same page to start with. And like you say, no doubt there's some gaps from both sides to at least start the conversation by the sound of it.
Yes.
So I like it. Yeah, it makes sense. It's simple. But like you say, the challenge is getting to the table, so to speak, isn't it? Because people don't like conflict, or the I guess they perceive there might be conflict, but it's actually quite the reverse if you do that. And I guess that sort of from a business owner context, by doing that, if that's the situation, then it's showing some vulnerability, which certainly is a big part of sort of building trust.
Exactly. And I think the way to get there is for people, as I say, to familiarize themselves with an approach that works. So they go from a place of saying, I don't know what to do with this. I just want to get rid of the person, or whatever their present start is, to saying, well, here's something that has worked and does work consistently. And if I work my way through the prep sheet, I will be sort of 3/4 of the way down the road by the time I'm even ready to convene a discussion with the other person. So all of a sudden, I've moved from being helpless or just, alienated or whatever, into being in a power position, not to power over the person, but to power with the person, to say, we can get through this, we can get along. And what you discover, of course, is when you get to the other side, all of a sudden there's a much more robust relationship. What you had before had never been tested. Now you know the other person, you know what makes them tick, and you know how things work with them. So you're going to be able to work much more productively with them.
So have you got a story you can tell us, our listeners, that I guess there was a fractured relationship, and then that was restored, and possibly the relationship might have improved or deepened thereafter?
Well, there was a consultant that worked with a very, very strong entrepreneur, and she worked with him for 10 years, and it had done a lot to help build up the businesses. And the entrepreneur had sold one business and had become very wealthy and was doing rather well. And so they were having a difficult meeting that might have led to another sale of another business. And the consultant said something that just rubbed the fur of the entrepreneur the wrong way. And he looked at her and he said, you, Rhonda, you know what the word was.
Yeah. I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And looked her cold in the eye in the middle of a meeting. Well, you could say things were at a very difficult pass.
Yes.
So she came to me and talked to me about this, and she didn't want to lose this relationship, although she felt she was right in what she'd said. And I said, well, you've got to square this up. But let's see if we can get you worked through this discussion with this person that's so central to your welfare. And she did. She worked it out with him. They discovered the context that the conversation had landed in. It had been acutely embarrassing to the entrepreneur in light of the other people who were in the room. And she didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a good story and a great outcome, obviously, in that case. So,
Yeah, they resumed their relationship and went on for another 10 years.
yeah, awesome. Fantastic. So, what is at least one thing you'd recommend a small business owner does based on your knowledge and expertise after listening to our little chat?
Well, I would say let's talk to ourselves about an avoided issue, something that you have in your world, an employee, an ally, a partner, a supplier that you've come apart with that you're not addressing. And let's get that clear so that you can say, yeah, I am not dealing with this situation. And then they can, take the steps we've outlined, get the book, read the book, and prep the discussion and have it so that disruption is healed.
Yeah, that's a great tip and some great insights. Thanks, Doug. So, look, I really appreciate your time. It's been a great chat, and I'm sure our listeners will get a lot of value out of it. So, thanks again.
Much appreciated for the opportunity. Appreciate you and the work that you're doing, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey.